Woke companies panic, eliminate illegal diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. Coming from the Washington Post, DEI is getting a new name. Can it dump the political baggage? That's not really what's going on here. They would like you to think they're just changing the name of DEI to deal with all the legal problems that DEI is having. They're not just changing the name of DEI. DEI is on the run. Coming from the National Review, DEI is on the run. It was a great racket while it lasted, but so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives have spent the last year in retreat, compelling the practitioners of discriminatory social justice to conduct a flailing rearguard action in a flight to more defensible terrain. The racism is still out there. From the Associated Press, the larger the nonprofit, the more likely it is run by a white man, says new Canada Diversity Report. Okay, so that means that white men are more dedicated to nonprofits and donating resources to people that need them? I don't know. What's that supposed to mean? It's just a racist comment. This nonsense is getting dealt with. Under mounting legal and political pressure, companies' DEI tactics are evolving. The Washington Post is a leftist publication. They want you to believe, oh, well, they're just making a couple of changes. When we get into the article, you'll see it's getting eliminated. It's not evolving. It's evolving itself out of existence, like a species that goes extinct. Last year, Eli Lilly's annual shareholders letter referenced the acronym for diversity, equity, and inclusion 48 times. This year, DEI is nowhere to be found. In March, Starbucks got shareholder approval to replace representation goals with talent performance for executive bonus initiatives. At Molson Coors, people and planet metrics have displaced environmental, social, and governance goals, and the acronym DEI has disappeared altogether. Amid growing legal, social, and political backlash, American business, industry groups, and employment professionals are quickly scrubbing DEI from public view, though not necessarily abandoning its practice. As they rebrand programs and hot-button acronyms, they're reassessing decades-old anti-discrimination strategies and rewriting policies that once emphasized race and gender to prioritize inclusion for all. The translation is that people with a certain skin color or sexual preference are not actually like disabled people. It doesn't make them veterans either. You can't get a special status in the United States for having a certain skin color or sexual preference. It's illegal. It's a stark contrast to 2020, when the death of George Floyd unleashed a racial justice movement that prompted companies to double down on policies aiming to increase opportunity for groups that have historically faced discrimination. That's not like George Floyd was looking for a specific job and he wasn't able to get that job, so they're giving jobs to people like George Floyd. That never happened. That had nothing to do with George Floyd. Less than a year after the Supreme Court struck down affirmative action in colleges and universities, a landmark ruling that found race-conscious admissions violated the right to equal treatment under the Constitution. Some conservatives have blamed DEI for a variety of problems, such as the Baltimore Bridge collapse and Boeing safety woes, without providing evidence. Dozens of anti-DEI bills are being considered by state legislatures across the country, and DEI looks poised to become a wedge issue in this year's presidential election. Johnny C. Taylor Jr., chief executive of the Society for Human Resource Management, said that practitioners of DEI and its antecedents traditionally have focused on improving representation for historically marginalized groups, believing that the magic bullet was diversity. Quote, "We underestimated that inclusion was the real challenge," Taylor said. Now people are saying, not only should we probably call it something different, we should probably evolve it. Yeah, you can't do illegal stuff. It's that simple. It doesn't matter what your skin color is. You can't get a certain entitlement for having illegal hiring practices. This shifting landscape is forcing companies and consultants to adapt on the fly, with many acting preemptively to guard against the legal threats that have led some firms to recast or discard race-based initiatives. They're renaming diversity programs, overhauling internal DEI teams, and working closely with lawyers. Some are moving away from using racial and gender considerations in hiring and promotion, and toward approaches that focus more on inclusion. And what they're saying here is, it's not that some are moving away from racial hiring preferences. All of them are moving away from racial hiring practices because they're overtly, obviously, completely illegal. It's beyond question. You just can't do it. You don't have the right to do it, much as you don't have the right to commit violence against people, even if you think it's for a good cause. Illegal is illegal, and they're being stopped. To be sure, some companies have successfully fended off challenges. In April, a discrimination lawsuit against an Amazon grant program for Black, Latino, and Native American contractors was dismissed by a federal court in Texas, though plaintiffs have appealed. Pfizer and Starbucks have prevailed in court against similar legal attacks, though Pfizer modified the DEI program in question to make it race-neutral, according to court filings. They're backing down completely. They know this is illegal. And many companies have held on to their program since the Supreme Court ruled against Harvard and the University of North Carolina last June. 6 months after the ruling, the employment law firm Littler Mendelsohn reported that 91% of the 320 executives surveyed said the ruling had not lessened their prioritization of DEI. In fact, 57% said they'd expanded their DEI programming in the past year. But that sentiment is far more subdued than it was in 2020, when corporate America poured more than $50 billion into racial justice causes. Meanwhile, the DEI industry, which was worth an estimated $9 billion in 2023, according to market researcher Fact.mr, is also rethinking its public face, consultants say. $9 billion a year in consulting for DEI? Yes, it was that big of a waste of money. Last fall, a few months after the Harvard-UNC decision, Taylor was already noticing growing antipathy towards the methods that companies, institutions of higher education, and other organizations use to diversify in their ranks. So instead of referring to DEI, Taylor switched to calling these efforts IED, putting the focus on inclusion, as DEI accrued cultural and political baggage. SHRM, the Human Resources Association he heads, changed the name of its annual DEI conference to Inclusion 2023. Some practitioners and executives dismissed the rebrand as superficial, Taylor said, a concession to political correctness. But months later, his strategy has proved prescient. A growing number of companies, including Language App, Duolingo, JetBlue, and Molson Coors, are either listing DEI as a risk factor in shareholder reports or removing mentions of diversity goals outright. A Bloomberg Law analysis found that 24 public companies have incorporated similar risk factor language into their filings, and several companies, including Kohl's, Salesforce, and Workday, have dropped references to diversity goals in regulatory filings, the Wall Street Journal reported. When public companies are telling their shareholders these DEI goals and DEI programs we have are risk factors, we could be sued over this, they're doing that because they're afraid of getting sued by shareholders for their irresponsible behavior in the past of having DEI programs. Eric Ellis, CEO of Integrity Development, a DEI consultancy, said he's seen the branding merry-go-round playing out for decades, tracing back to the wake of the civil rights movement. He expects the language to keep changing in response to public attacks, especially those by high-profile figures like Elon Musk, who in January wrote on his social media platform Twitter that DEI is just another word for racism. Quote, if every day you're getting pummeled and there's no effective strategy to protect the brand of DEI, there's no doubt it's going to be hard for it to survive, Ellis said. We keep adjusting. They're on the run. Starbucks is a case in point for how companies are altering terminology around DEI. After George Floyd's death, his company was among the first wave of firms incentivizing executives to achieve DEI targets, he noted. But starting this year, Starbucks is weighing its incentive plan more towards financial performance, tethering representation-related rewards to talent goals. The company's 2024 proxy statement references a goal to ensure that leaders have accountability for creating a culture of belonging. Quote, Starbucks was an interesting case because they did come out with very specific goals, Bueno said. Now, they're moving them from a more prominent area of the bonus plan to a little more backstage. Bueno estimates that 35 to 40% of large cap companies, that means very big public companies, those with a market capitalization of $10 billion or more, have some DEI targets in their executive bonus criteria. About half of them frame these policies around quantitative targets, while the rest take a more qualitative approach. Still, quote, companies are treading carefully given the legal climate, he said. Yeah, it's completely all illegal. So the majority of companies, even by his very aggressive estimates, are saying, no, we're not going to bonus people based on DEI goals. Betsy McManus, a spokeswoman for Starbucks, said the company has a goal of achieving racial and ethnic diversity of at least 30% of all corporate levels and at least 40% at all retail levels and manufacturing roles by 2025 in the U.S. Quote, real inclusion requires intent, and diversity creates stronger communities and workforce, McManus said in a statement emailed to the Washington Post. With that in mind, we continue to make improvements and changes to ensure Starbucks remains a diverse, inclusive, equitable, and accessible company. Eli Lilly, however, yanked DEI from its proxy statement this year and dropped mentions of racial justice from 8 times in 2023 to once in 2024. It also eliminated a section on progress towards meeting its racial justice commitments, which had been included in 2023. Yet the pharmaceutical company Eli Lilly still ties executive compensation to general goals of fostering diversity within the company, and it cites fostering a diverse workforce as a core priority. In a statement to the Post, the company said it removed the references to DEI to avoid redundancies in reporting. Information about the company's diversity efforts and racial justice commitments are detailed in its latest ESG report, as well as in a separate DEI report published last fall. Quote, Lilly is committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. They are foundational in every part of our organization and essential elements of our success as a company, Eli Lilly said. What these companies are trying to avoid is obviously illegal activity. Stating specific quotas by race or by gender or by sexual preference has been illegal since the 1970s. None of that has changed. They are being much more careful, but a lot of these companies are just purging these programs altogether. Molson Coors, meanwhile, erased DEI references from its people and planet metrics, a change from 2023. This year it says fostering an inclusive culture is central to its efforts. The company did not respond to a request for comment. Many large companies see a correlation between a diverse workforce and financial success and routinely tout the business case for DEI. The business case for DEI is that DEI is a waste of money and resources. It's all virtue signaling, it's completely inappropriate, and you should never ever think that a company that says, oh, there's a business case for DEI, the business case is that the company should not be trusted with shareholder money. There is not one solitary business case for DEI that I've ever seen, and I watch these articles on a daily basis. It's going on longer than a year now. There is no business case for DEI. It's a waste of money, and companies and executives in particular should be held personally liable for wasting those company funds. Here are some phony statistics from McKinsey & Company, keeping in mind, which it doesn't say in this article, and it never says in any of the articles, McKinsey & Company, aside from being part of political establishment and being part of big business, McKinsey & Company is a consulting firm that literally sells DEI services to these companies. So surprisingly, they came up with a report that supposedly proves that their services are worthwhile and that companies should give them money based on this report that they came up with on their own. From McKinsey & Company, companies with the highest racial, ethnic, and gender representation are 39% more likely to financially outperform, according to a 2023 study by McKinsey & Company involving more than 1,200 firms worldwide. In June of last year, a study by the ratings agency Moody's found that companies with higher ratings tended to have a greater racial diversity on their boards and in their executive ranks. In his annual letter to shareholders this year, JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon emphasized that DEI initiatives make us more of an inclusive company and lead to more innovation, smarter decisions, and better financial results for us and the economy overall. He also, of course, provides no documentation for that. It's just a generic statement. Still, he said, JP Morgan will scour its programs to ensure they comply with the changing legal landscape. Similar assessments are playing out at Meta, Snap, DoorDash, and Home Depot, which have culled their internal DEI teams in the past year. Marilyn Fish, an Atlanta-based employment attorney who specializes in affirmative action, said she's seen companies looking at policies more holistically since the Harvard-UNC decision. Many of her clients, among them Fortune 500 companies, have renamed their programs to put inclusion up front, hoping it will resonate with employees. Some of her clients recently moved away from employee resource groups that had identified some people as members and others as allies. Some opened up mentorship programs that were reserved for employees of certain races to people of all backgrounds. But I do think that some programs were operating with an exclusivity that was potentially problematic, Fish said. She doesn't think that the new labels matter much from a legal perspective. What matters most is how the programs are being implemented. If you discriminate against your employees based on their race or based on a specific group that they personally belong to, there are legal problems. Joelle Emerson, chief executive of DEI consultancy Paradigm, considers corporate DEI to be one of our most visible civil rights initiatives of the past decade. Much like affirmative action before it, DEI has faced resistance from within organizations and outside them, and now it's being thrust into the political limelight at a moment of acute polarization. Polarization is if you don't submit to their illegal agenda. They consider you polarized because you haven't submitted to them yet. Well, illegal is illegal. Affirmative action is one thing. This is way beyond affirmative action, where you don't give opportunities to people based on their skin color. You can't do that. You can't have reverse racism and say, well, it's just like affirmative action. Hiring people based on merit is what creates a level playing field. Hiring people based on skin color doesn't make a level playing field. That goes back to a time that we don't want to go back to. Quote, DEI has only been the acronym du jour since 2020, Emerson said. Regardless what we call it, we've done a really poor job storytelling what this work is actually about. Well, if you're the consultant, shouldn't you have the story and the pitch down? Yes. The problem is either she's not competent or she's competent, but she knows it's illegal. They've been getting away with it, and they're not getting away with it anymore. The rebranding is clearly being sparked by the baggage now associated with DEI, Emerson said. She pointed to conservative activist Christopher Rufo, who has been a hero in all this, who led the campaign to oust Harvard's first black president, the plagiarist Claudine Gay, framing her exit as the beginning of the end for DEI in America's institutions. Quote, companies with leaders that might be particularly supportive of DEI might also be the ones that are uniquely averse to drawing scrutiny, Emerson said. A lot of the companies that were vocal in the past have already been sued. Rhonda Murray, founder of Elevated Diversity, a DEI consultancy, said she's seen a shift in what we're being asked to do. Demand for programs such as unconscious bias training, high a few years ago, has dried up, she said. Unconscious bias training is where they tell you, oh, based on your skin color, you're a racist. You don't agree with that? That's okay. It's not your fault. You don't understand. It's unconscious. So we're just going to call you racist based on your skin color. So can we have some millions of dollars in consulting over this? And the companies would say, sure, why not? How much do you want? You got it. She claims there's been a spike of interest in employee resource groups, particularly those that aren't race-based, such as groups for caregivers, veterans, and first-generation Americans. Like many consultants, Moray has been tweaking the terminology she uses to describe her work, now framing it as L&I, leadership and inclusion. She prides herself on having always taken an inclusion-forward approach, and she's noticed the movement away from emphasizing diversity in her field. But she's conflicted about whether to follow the tide and change Elevated Diversity's name. Quote, I am what someone thinks of when they think of diversity, said Moray, who is black. Do I want to change who I am to be able to fit into another model? I still haven't decided. The game is not over, but it's coming to an end. Diversity, equity, and inclusion was a plan to try to get away with doing things that are completely, clearly illegal. Since the 1970s, while there have been affirmative action programs, it's been illegal for companies to say, we want 25% of our employees to be this race. We want 22% of our employees to be that gender. It was tested at the Supreme Court, and it lost in the Supreme Court. It's not allowed. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is on the run, and it should be because companies are going to get more and more lawsuits over this. It's clearly illegal. Let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another story. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.